I'm just not a water guy. But so having said that, our new salesperson that we just hired, thought it'd be nice to bring in donuts. He didn't catch wind that, we're all on this 85-day weight loss challenge. So he brought 3 boxes of donuts. If we would have brought those a week and a half ago, they would have been like scarfed down in no time. But yeah, so we got donuts left over if you guys want donuts. They're not that old. They're not even a day old. What's that? They were new this morning. Yeah, they were. Yep.
They weren't there when I came in.
Oh, they weren't?
They were here when I got here at lunch.
So
There you go.
yeah, so that's that. Everybody knows where the break room is? The bathrooms? Okay, so down the hall, if you want water, there's water in there, there's pop in there, help yourself. Energy drinks, we're a Monster company. Well, no, we're a Red Bull one too. Security's a lot of work, so we do a lot of energy drinks. So I was telling Matt before class started that tonight is another not very deep night. It's kind of a light night. For those of you who read the chapter, you're like, all right, I can handle this. So last week or Thursday was 50-ish slides. Today's about 60-ish slides. Thursday is like 75 slides, and then we're going to hit it really hard. So we're kind of easing you into this. That's okay. That's by design, sort of. It also follows along with the book. But we do have a couple of classes where it's like 130 slides. So that's, we're going to get hammered in those classes. So today we've got time to address questions online. We have time to address questions that people have here as you're kind of getting into it. This is kind of laying the foundation for everything that we're studying. So Noah, you had a question earlier about NIST SP 800-53, I think. Did you was that a good answer? Did you get what you were looking for, or do you want to expand?
No, I mean,
okay.
You said it, you don't really follow that.
Oh, right.
Whatever.
Right.
It's also in depth.
It's prescriptive. Yep.
So,
yep. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the standards tonight. A lot of it is how you apply it, right? Nobody uses the standard and then follows everything that's in the standard, unless you're going for something like a certification, like ISO, high trust. Then you kind of have to follow the things that are saying. But even then, you get some leeway. But we'll cover all that stuff. So, and today's the first day with the quiz. Now, quizzes are always, I don't know if you guys have ever taught before, but whenever you do a quiz and you didn't read the quiz questions, you leave yourself kind of open, right? Because I'm going to answer the questions, and if I get them wrong, you guys be like, does this guy really know what he's talking about? So that'll be fun.
I should have cheated and got them.
Shut it, yeah. Well, all I did was just create the slides, and then I was like, well, I should read it, but I didn't. So there's that, and then yeah. Oh, and you'll also notice that as you get through security, one of the things that Brad and I were talking about too. There's certain domains that are more of a challenge for us than others, and that's natural. You can't be an expert in all parts of security. It's impossible. You can be experts in things that you choose to be an expert, because it's a very broad subject. One of the things that Brad was sharing, when he was prepping for his exam was, the encryption domain was more of a challenge for him because at the time, he didn't use it a lot, right? So you'll find that when we cover things like today, we're going to talk about a little bit about memory, talk about SDRAM and DRAM and ROM and EEPROM and all those good things. I haven't worked with hardware for years, so I'm not an expert at that part, right? So that's fine. If you have something to add to what we're talking about, that's all welcome and good. So this is what we're going to talk about today: information security governance. How does that make people feel when you say like information security governance? Does that sound kind of dry, boring? Well, the reason why I'm curious is because, what's that?
Depends if you're if you're on the auditing side or the audited side.
Depends on if you're the governor or the governed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me, and the reason why I'm curious about that is because I always know that people are the most significant risk. So when you talk about information security, it's always the people part. Right, the attacks that are happening nowadays are all people related. It's phishing attacks. It's tricking you into downloading malicious code. It's tricking you to go into a website with a 1x1 pixel iframe downloading something in the back end. It's always something. There's a person involved, and so the governance piece. The reason why I'm asking that is when I say information security governance, and I want you to cooperate with what I'm doing, what I'm preaching, does that make you feel like, you know, because that's important, you know, when you're trying to get people to do things that you want to do. It's more so like when I'm out there in the real world. This is real world too, but yeah, it is. Because when you're teaching, right, doing security training and awareness classes, there's certain things I know that people don't like to hear. People don't like to hear mandatory. It's a word where people like instantly shut down. People usually don't like to hear about, hey, we have information security training on Tuesday. You know what I mean? It's got a negative connotation to it. So if you've already got a negative kind of feel about words, then that means there's more to overcome to get cooperation. You know what I'm saying? See how those play off each other? So that's why I'm just curious. When I hear information security governance, I get kind of giddy about it, but other people are probably like, lame. That's why it's important. Administrative controls, so it's the people part of security. So it's policies, procedures, training, and awareness. It's the things that we use to apply governance. Risk analysis, and we covered this stuff last week. ALE, we didn't cover that. We went through this pretty fast, right? Annualized loss expectancy, total cost of ownership, return on investment, or better in security, return on security investment, and how those play. Talked about legal systems and ethics. There's some good meat in last week for the exam. So we'll do the quiz. Anybody get a chance to look at the quiz? Try the quiz? Do you already know the answers? One person. That's it? Seriously? Two. Okay. Like 5. That's awesome. All right. So here are the questions, and I'll have to read them. Which of the following would be an example of a policy statement? And online, if you want to type, your guesses, that's fine, or if you already did it. Policy, which of these would be a policy statement? So policy statements, we want very high level. We don't want them to change very often. We want policy statements to be approved by executive management. We want them to apply on a broad range. So which of these kind of fits that? Protect PII by hardening servers. Hardening Windows by first installing the pre-hardened OS image. You may create a strong password by choosing the first letter of each word in a sentence and mixing in numbers and symbols. Download the CIS Windows benchmark and apply it. All right, so C is you may, right? Anytime we use the word may, that's not mandatory. That's optional, so C you can cross off. Harden Windows servers by first installing the pre-hardened OS image. It seems a little prescriptive. That might be better for a standard. 2 would be more of a guideline. And D, download the CIS Windows benchmark and apply it. That also seems standardish to me. Protect PII by hardening servers. That leaves a lot of room open for interpretation. That to me seems like it's probably more the policy statement. So far we're 1 for 1. Do you guys agree with that? Yeah, I got them flying in. It's pretty cool, right? So which of the following describes the money saved by implementing a security control? Ooh, you're gonna save some money by implementing a security control. Total cost of ownership, asset value, return on investment, control savings. So if you guys read the book, they would have steered, so asset value you can cross off right away, right? That's how much the asset is worth. It has nothing to do with the security controls I've applied. I apply a security control, and that what's left over is the exposure factor. You remember that? So I take the asset value times exposure factor. That's going to give me a single loss expectancy. How many times do I expect it to happen over 12 months? That's the annualized loss expectancy. You apply a control, the cost of the control minus the annualized loss expectancy gives me something. Total cost of ownership. So asset value is off. Control savings is off. That's not even something that was in the book, right? So return on investment or total cost of ownership. See? Yeah. Total cost of ownership is that piece of the control itself. So return on investment, in actuality, we call it return on security investment because I'm not actually going to get benefits saving from losses. So which of the following is an example of a program policy? Establish the information security program, email policy, application development policy, server policy. A? Yep, at the program level, the highest level. When I showed that diagram, that information security policy that was across the top, supported by the issue and topic specific policies, that would be a program policy. It governs the program itself. So far,
Enterprise policy.
you can call it enterprise. Yep. Yep. Synonymous. So far, we're like 3 for 3. So I think we'll call it a day. Back it up. Yeah. Which of the following proves an identity claim? So authentication, it's hard to pass that one. B, authorization, C, accountability, and D, auditing. We know what these all are, right? Authentication is proving the identity. Authorization is what you do, what you get, the privileges, the rights, things like that. Once you authenticate with the system, accountability is the log files, the things that we have for non-repudiation. And auditing is making sure it's all working. Auditing wasn't in chapter 1, but the answer is authentication, right? Which of the following protects against unauthorized changes to data? So unauthorized changes, we have CIA. Alteration is the opposite of integrity. Confidentiality, integrity, availability, or alteration. One that protects would be, I guess, integrity. It's kind of a poorly worded question, though, I think, right?
Yeah, I will say that that's pretty accurate on how the questions are worded, though. It's gotta,
Yeah, I mean, it's
figure out what they're asking.
yeah, it's not a well-written question. You know, which protects against? I mean, none of those were protect against. We're protecting against the compromise of those things with controls. So in actuality, it's not integrity that protects. It's the controls that are put in place to protect the integrity, right? So wording thing. But I said very first class, words matter. So that sort of, I don't like that question at all. So here we go. We get to put into application, I think the ALE, SLE, EF, AV, all those acronyms and letters. So in these 3 questions, your company sells Apple iPods. Those still a thing? Are there iPods still? I can go buy an iPod? Wow. All right. So your company sells iPods and has suffered many denial of service attacks. Your company makes an average of $20,000 profit per week, and a typical DOS attack lowers sales by 40%. You suffer 7 DOS attacks on average per year. Where is this company doing business? That's a lot of DOS attacks. A DOS mitigation service is available for a subscription fee of $10,000 a month. FRSecure will do it for you for 5. You have tested this service and believe it will mitigate the attacks. So there's, yeah, when you read this question, so the question which you need to understand for the exam will cover too, but in real life, there's still going to be some residual risk left, right? So even if I put a control in place, there's still some exposure factor left over in reality. But here it's going to be a 100% mitigated, it looks like. So what is the annual rate of occurrence in the above scenario? That tells us right in the question, it happens 7 times per year. So the answer is C. Push the button. What is the annualized loss expectancy of the lost iPod sales due to DOS attacks? So $10,000 per week is essentially the asset value. 40%. So our exposure factor is, wait, is it $20,000 per week? All right. So yeah, 20. I can't read. It helps if you read for the exam. $20,000 profit, 40%. Annual loss, and then times 7, right? So 20,000, 40%, that's 8,000 times 7, 56,000. Do you guys come up with that same math? D? 7 for 7. Is the DOS mitigation service a good investment? So what are we saving again? 56,000. That's per year. And the subscription fee is $10,000 per month. That's going to be $120,000. So I've got a net loss, a negative return on security investment of 64,000. So no, right? No. So which no is it? Is it TCO is higher or lower than the annualized loss expectancy. It's higher, so C. This is easy.
Yeah, and
You guys are going to ace this exam.
This is what I was talking about.
You're going to have a lot of these
are
questions.
Very accurate questions with a lot of information, and then you got to figure out which one of these questions is it. What out of that main question is or that scenario is that question?
Yeah.
Really accurate.
So not the most exciting thing, but you know, and so I've only had to do this in real life once, where I've actually had to demonstrate that there was a return on security investment. But you know, it probably should be done more often if you can gather the data. One of the things that people have trouble gathering the data is they don't know what the asset value is. That's me. What's going on here? Yeah. You know, they don't understand what the asset value. We don't understand truly what the exposure factor truly is. That's what makes the numbers is what makes these things difficult to do. So question 9, which of the following steps will be taken while conducting a qualitative risk analysis? Remember the difference between qualitative and quantitative? Calculate the asset value, calculate the return on investment, complete the risk analysis matrix, complete the annualized loss expectancy. So 3 of those are based on hard data, and 1 of those is based on opinion, primarily, right? And so the answer here is definitely C. What is the difference between a standard and a guideline? Standard, we know right off the bat, the primary difference between those 2 is one's mandatory and one's not mandatory. So standards are compulsory. I think compulsory means like I don't have to do it. So compulsory means. And guidelines are mandatory. That's not true. Standards are recommendations and guidelines are requirements. That's also not true. Standards are requirements and guidelines are recommendations. That sounds pretty close. D, standards are recommendations and guidelines are optional. C is the best answer. Standards are not recommendations. Now you'll note you need to get in the habit of reading every answer. Even if you come like in that one, we came on C was the answer. Still read D. You might have a better answer. You'll need to get in the habit of that. An attacker sees a building protected by security guards and attacks a building next door with no guards. What control combination are the security guards? Well, they're definitely physical. So that's the same across. Is it a compensating control, detective control, deterrent control, or preventative control? This is where you have to take context into account. So the attacker didn't attack here, they attacked here because that was there. It was a deterrent control. We're winning right now. All right, which canon of the IC² Code of Ethics should be considered the most important? Protect society, Commonwealth, and the infrastructure. That's actually the right one, but you can read the other ones if you want to. So, still winning. Which doctrine would likely allow for duplication of copyrighted material for research purposes without consent of the copyright holder? So there's 2 principles that apply: fair use and it's not first sale. It's fair sale, fair use, fair sale. I can't remember. Anyway, this is fair use. There's no first sale. There's no first privilege or first dilution, free dilution. That'd be funny. Free dilution. I don't even know how you do that one. So, but B is the right answer. Fair use. So one of the fair use rule means that I can make copies freely. The other one, fair sale, means I can resell what I bought. Which type of intellectual property is focused on maintaining brand recognition? Patent, trade secrets, copyright, or trademark. Brand recognition is all around copyright or trademark. Oh, copy, no, sorry. See, went too fast. Because copyright is protecting artistic works. That's where I messed up. So I got one wrong. Questions? All right, easy. We're basically ready to take the exam on that part. All right, so today, so these are just more examples. You know, I was talking about, you know, how some of the current events, you know, that are out in the world. This was actually from last year. Yeah, you can read up on that if you want to. So today we're going to talk about asset security, which is sort of funny because this domain is called asset security, yet we're not talking about really asset management. You know, the entire life cycle. You know, when I think of asset security, I think of asset management, having an asset management policy, you know, all the documentation and procedures for the entire life cycle of an asset, right? And there's three types of assets. When I think of an asset, I think of physical assets, which is what most people can relate to. And that's when I ask people, do you have an asset inventory? They say, oh yeah. And they're talking physical assets, right? Things that I can touch. But there's also software assets, right? I have to have licensing to use the software that I use, or if I've developed my own software, that's an asset. And then the last is data assets, which is traditionally the most, well, not traditionally, now is usually the most valuable asset in an organization. Tangible assets are not where most of the value is tied up. So leading us back to that due diligence, if I'm running an organization and I know, for instance, that 80% of my company's value, assets, is tied up in intangible assets, people, and those things that I can't touch, and I haven't done an asset inventory, does that make me negligent? You'd think so, right? But it's not there yet, because we're also still kind of applying that prudent man rule where, you know, well, nobody else is doing it, so that gives me some kind of defense in that. But I agree. I think if I know, maybe they don't know, but 80% of my, you know, some huge percent of value is tied up in the data that I have, also in people, you know, things that we know, and I haven't done, you know, my job to really even know what that is. That's like, you know, to me that's a problem, and to you it sounds like it's probably a problem too. So asset ownership, we'll talk about the concept of asset ownership in all three of those areas, right? There's different types of assets. We'll talk about business ownership, good stuff like that. Memory and remnants. So remnants is, you know, what remains, it's what's left over. Data destruction and determining data security controls based on standards. So we'll talk about some of the most common standards. If you haven't, you know, been introduced to NIST CSF, that's the cybersecurity framework. I just have a quick introduction. It's not testable, but I think it's important for your day-to-day work because it is a standard that we run into and use on a regular basis. Cool. So first thing we'll cover is the concept of labels. Labels are applied to subjects or objects, right? Labels are applied to objects. Clearance is applied to, or rights or privileges are applied to subjects. Objects, if you remember, are those things that they're not active, right? Maybe a file, maybe just data itself. So objects have labels, subjects have clearances. This is kind of foundational. Now we'll go into this deeper, further in on the book, right? Data classification scheme. We'll talk about data classification and how it's driven from policy and what a data classification scheme should look like. But a data classification scheme, you know, certain types of data is more valuable, more important than other types of data. So classifying my data based on its importance, based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, then applies what label I'm going to put to it. Some of the most common labels in government are top secret, secret, and confidential. There's a number of other clearance levels. You know, there's secret but unclassified, there's secret, I already said secret, secret but unclassified, there's unclassified, there's a bunch of, I don't work in the government, but I know that there's a lot of classifications for data. In the private sector, for companies that haven't done data classification, we need to keep it simple, right? We could create 10 classifications of data, but it's too complicated. People won't follow it. Is this, you know, this classification or that classification? Because driven from that classification is protection requirements, right? So normally in a business, we'll do three types of classifications for companies. We'll do confidential, internal use only, and public, right? And you kind of intrinsically know the difference, I think, between, we'll get a little deeper into those. Sometimes we have a fourth classification, which might be PHI, right? Or, you know, PII. You know, it may have its own classification. But you see how the classifications are applied to the, labels, which are we apply those in classifications, are tied to objects, right? Which is our data. So security compartments, documented and need to know clearance. We'll talk more about security compartments and the compartmentalized versus non-compartmentalized and all that good stuff. But security compartments essentially are organizational units that allow me to apply specific controls based on the compartment that it's in. What I need for compartmentalized access to put in place compartments are a need to know, and it needs to be formalized. Sound good? So clearance. So objects have labels, subjects have clearances. Formal approval, authorization. Anytime you see the word formal, think documented. Right? Formal means documented. So formal approval, authorization to specific levels of information. Can a subject be trusted? Anybody here have any kind of governmental clearance? Used to? Yeah, so you know what that process looks like. Like secret when unclassified, but basically all you need is a fingerprint check and an FBI. And it's really pretty simple. For top secret clearance, they send people out to interview you and all your friends and all your friends' friends. And I mean, they do a really thorough background check. And they ask you, okay, anybody ever been on that side of it? Yeah, so like I just had one, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. I've had numerous, but they just show up at your door, right? They show up at your door and they start out by flipping a badge. You're like, oh, dude. At first I'm thinking, what did I do now? And then I'm like, oh, okay, you're here to do a background investigation, and you sit down and they ask you a bunch of questions. And a lot of those questions they ask you, I can't remember. I mean, I haven't talked to that person for a while, so I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, anyway. So it's very thorough. And what they're trying to figure out is, can you be trusted with top secret information or not? Do you work for a foreign government? Do you have foreign ties? Are you financially stable? Are you going to use this information and sell it off to somebody else? They're trying to determine all that stuff before they're going to give you top secret clearance. But that's the clearance part. Not used much in the private sector formally, anyway. Clearance is more kind of informal. We're getting there. We're doing more background checks than we used to. If you want to know more about clearances, you want to read a bunch of information about it, you can do that. And then there's the standard form 86, which is a 127-page questionnaire. It's very thorough. That's for top secret clearance. But really, for the test, what I need to know is subjects get labels. Sorry, objects get labels, subjects get clearances, right? So get that clear. Formal access approval, again, documented. If anything says formal, it's documented. Access request should be approved by the owner. So when you look at your own environment, you look at your own assets, right? Assets, maybe their servers, maybe their applications, maybe their business processes, maybe their data themselves. Those things have somebody who's responsible for it, whether or not you've gone through the process of documenting that. Those are the people that authorize access requests, right? It's not IT, and it's not managers, it's the owners of the assets. In most cases, it ends up being IT. So IT then serves as the asset owner and the asset custodian, which is really a conflict. It's a segregation of duties issue, right? Sometimes that's cited by examiners, sometimes it's not. So anyway, access request should be approved by the asset owner. That's one of their documented responsibilities, is to do that. And we will get more into this when we get into data classification. I just show you some sample policy statements around that. Approve subject access to certain objects, the objects for which they're responsible. Subjects must understand all rules and requirements for access. So not only is it my responsibility as an asset owner to approve access requests, but it's also my responsibility to ensure that you know what my expectations are for you in using that asset. Right? Does that happen in companies that you guys work for? It works for, yeah, because you've got a good security program. Yeah, in a lot of companies that this doesn't play out. It's easy to conceptualize. It's much more difficult to apply. Best practice is that all access requests and access approvals are auditable. Right? Documentation. Ticketing systems work well for this, but make sure that you can go back and determine who approved what, when, and that becomes really important when we talked before about preventative, detective, in corrective controls, that would be, potentially, if I'm doing an audit and I find a gap, that would be then a detective control. But if something bad happened and they need to go back and find out who gave this access, then it would be a corrective control. Do you see how context plays a big part when we talk about those different types of controls? Any questions on this? Formal access approval? Yeah.
If you can't define necessarily an owner, right, or you should, but in the real world, can you do it by a dual so that IT is doing an approval for the security side or the network side, and then the manager or the data owner somewhat on the other side? Would that still cover it?
What's the
So I'm saying, like, defining a data owner or an owner of a software, let's say.
okay?
Right, and then asking them to be the access request or to
Approve access
approve
request.
access. If we find sometimes that nobody wants to own the software outside of IT.
Right.
Well, validly.
Right.
So we have managers sometimes and then IT. Both it requires dual approval for any access.
Okay.
This is how we're trying to work.
So manager and IT approve the access
Yeah.
request, as opposed to an owner that can't necessarily be defined or won't. Yeah, it's better than just IT, approving it, but it still doesn't meet the.
So what's the problem with the manager versus owner?
Well, sometimes the manager is the owner.
It still can be, right?
Yeah, the manager can be the owner too, but it's here. The point is, this application has this owner, and Jane in accounting wants access to that system, so they get manager approval and it comes to IT, and it never goes to the owner when they're separate.
Okay, so as
Yeah.
long as it can be the owner.
Oh, right. Yeah. So the question, can a manager also be the owner? Yes, absolutely. Yep. We don't want the manager to be the owner and be the one who gives the actual grants the permissions. That's the IT piece. Right. Yeah. Good question. All right, so data classification. I have a sample that I can send you guys. If you guys want the sample, just let me know, or maybe I'll just make it part of this thing. But data classification policies are really pretty simple. They're simple to write, right? It's typically 3 roles. We've got owner, custodian, user. We've got 3 classifications: confidential, internal use, and public. So providing definitions of what those things are, and then maybe put some handling requirements, and that's a pretty good data classification policy. This is how you apply these things in the real world. So 3 roles: owner, custodian, user. So the owner is the one ultimately responsible for that asset. They're the ones, it's easy in like the finance department, right? So we have an accounting software package, and we have a CFO. The CFO is responsible, that he's the owner, right? I wouldn't be the owner. They're the ones who are reliant on that asset to do authorized business functions, right? And then you've got different types of ownership. I've got data owner. Sometimes it gets a little complicated when I have data owner, application owner, and business owner. As you get into bigger organizations, sometimes you run into that. So the business owner delegates all the application management functions to another owner, and they're responsible for the application. And then to make it even more complicated, I could have business owner, application owner, data owner, IT systems owner. If this application resides on a database with multiple databases, I might have a database owner. So it can get kind of complicated, but for the test, owner, data custodian, data user, those 3 roles. Classifications, confidential, internal use, and public are good classifications to implement in your environment. In real life, so that's easy, right? Easy concepts. Now go out and try to find your assets. Go out and try to find your owners, and then you have to train them, make sure they know that they're an owner and this is what their responsibilities are. And then change your business processes to make sure that they're involved in the access request approvals. They're involved in the user account reconciliation processes. They're involved in the auditing of the security of those assets. It's a lot harder to put it in practice. So I understand why people, struggle with this. But you kind of have to start somewhere. So start with your asset inventory. To bring us back to that, that question of, if I know that 80% of my company's value is tied up in intangible assets, am I negligent if I don't have a data, or if I don't have an asset inventory? Today, probably, you can probably get away with that, but where it's going, no. I can't secure what I don't know I have, right? So eventually that will become a negligent thing not to have an asset inventory, I would assume. So next thing after that asset inventory, if you're going to implement a data classification, is now start to assign responsibilities or roles to those data assets, and then implement. And you might have to move things around, but that's kind of where it starts. Data classification also defines things like data handling requirements, data storage requirements, essentially data retention requirements, data security requirements in general. Data retention is another one of those things that people don't want to be separated from their data. They're like, I got to keep this. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of fall for that too. I have like 60 billion emails, and really, do I need to keep that many? So data retention's tough for everybody. And I'll talk a little bit about data retention, kind of, that process too. So data owner, this comes from a sample policy. The data owner is normally the person responsible for, dependent upon the business process associated with the information asset, knowledgeable about how information is acquired, transmitted, stored, deleted, and otherwise processed. That's who a data owner is. They determine the appropriate value and classification. So if I ever wanted to get to that more of a quantified risk analysis, the data owner should be able to help me determine how valuable this asset actually is. The data owner also, based on that how valuable the asset is, can also help me with criticality. How critical is this asset? That becomes a really important thing when we talk about disaster recovery and business continuity. How long can we go without this asset being available before we're going to suffer, big time, maybe? And that would be maybe my recovery time objective, right? We'll get to what that is later on too. So they're important on determining what that value is. You don't want IT telling you what the value is. They'll tell you how much you paid for it. There's more value to it than that. The data owner must communicate the information classification when the information is released outside the department and or FRSecure. Maybe. The data owner controls access to his or her information. It must be consulted when access is extended or modified. The data owner must communicate the classification to the data custodian so the data custodian may provide the appropriate levels of protection. That's an asset owner, data owner. Now the data custodian is typically IT, right? You can see kind of, especially on that last one, you need to tell IT how critical this asset is, and you need to consult me when you're changing access. So that's the data custodian. Maintains the protection of the data according to the information classification associated with it, to it by the data owner. Data custodian role is delegated by the data owner and is usually IT personnel. So there's a lot of other things that go into data custodian, but at the policy level, that's pretty sufficient. The data user, essentially, with all those words, they just agree to use the data asset in accordance with policy. But they interact with the data for performing an authorized task, and they just have to do it the right way. So that's your 3 roles. Any questions? Okay, so the classifications now, the 3 different classifications of data. Confidential, that's our most sensitive type of data. Confidential data is protected by statutes, regulations, policies, contractual language. Data owners can also designate data as confidential. So it may not fit any of our other definitions, but a data owner could say, I want this treated like it's confidential. Ideally, that's after they've been trained on what these things are, right? Because every data owner thinks that their data is like the most important data that ever lived. So, check it off against that. Confidential data is sensitive in nature. Access is restricted. Disclosure is limited to a need to know. Now, need to know, we talked about need to know and least privilege. Do you remember what the difference is between those two? Need to know applies to data, least privilege applies to the system, right? So they have to have a specific need to know. Thankfully in this policy, we didn't say a formal need to know because we'd have to document all those things. Disclosure to parties outside the company must be authorized by executive management, approved by the information security, or be covered by a bonding NDA or confidentiality agreement, right? So we don't release that to anybody. Examples, PHI, medical records, financial information, credit card account numbers, social security numbers, personnel, payroll, all that kind of stuff, right? So got my roles, got one classification. The next classification is internal use only. This is typically the default. So if something hasn't been specifically classified, IT is supposed to treat it in this policy as though it is internal use only. So when stored in electronic format must be, oh, sorry, I'm doing protection requirements now. Encryption, right? These would be the most stringent security requirements. So strong authentication, include strong passwords. And we'll talk about strong passwords as kind of an oxymoron, right? Is that the right word? Oxymoron, that means something that is supposed to mean something that doesn't really mean that thing? Sort of. Yeah. So I used that right, didn't I? I'm so smart. It's the hat. So no such thing as strong passwords. Real, I mean, there is, but nobody uses it that way. So let's see the requirement. Mobile devices, media have to be encrypted, provided by some standard. Have to be stored in a locked room, so on and so forth, and then encrypted again and transferred to any entity outside. Starting to see, the requirement to have things, encrypted internally as well. So, but you get the point, right? Other minimum protection requirements sent via fax. Does people use faxes? Do people really?
Through the multi-function scanner, it doesn't feel like it as much anymore.
Right. Dang.
You
do?
Nursing homes especially.
Oh, I don't fax. Well, if you're going to fax, do that. Must not be posted on any public website. Seems to make sense, but there's no common sense in security. Remember those 10 principles. Must be destroyed when no longer needed, subject to some type of something. And there's just some ways that you can destroy data. We'll get more into destroying data, but anyway, that's confidential. That's confidential data. This is important. So if confidential is lost or stolen, somebody needs to be notified. We need to initiate the incident response process. So the incident response process, we'll get into that more in later chapters too, but everything that we do in information security has to be governed by policy, right? That's kind of our rule of thumb. So if anything I'm doing in security doesn't find its root somewhere in policy, that really means I have no management approval to do what it is I'm doing. That's the importance, of policy. So that, in this case, if there's a disclosure, I'd have an incident management policy and incident response procedures and, follow those as appropriate. But somebody needs to be notified. And then we also have to have some labeling requirements. So you'll see this is one easy way for us to assess the effectiveness of this policy is when I asked to see documents. You look at a document, if it doesn't have a footer or some kind of labeling on it, how am I supposed to know that that's confidential or internal use or whatever? So labeling is pretty important. And it's easy to kind of fail on this if you're not labeling your documents. So having templates for Word documents is kind of a good deal. Yeah, you guys do this? Yeah. All right, so internal data. Proprietary, ethical, privacy considerations, it's the next level down. Internal data, you can think of it as internal data as data that, if it were disclosed, publicly, it's not going to cause us material harm. It's not going to kill us. It's a nuisance. It's, it's not good. Like phone directories, it's a good example of an internal piece. We don't want that out on the internet, but if it did, whatever, we're not going to die. That's that kind of data. So employment data, business partner information, that kind of thing. Minimum protection requirements, you would expect this to be less stringent than the confidential data. Must be protected. Now this is a policy, so interpretation of protected would be left to the standards, guidelines, and procedures. So it's okay that that's not prescriptive enough. Must be protected by an NDA or confidentiality agreement. Stored in a closed container, so it doesn't have to necessarily be a locked room like the other ones, or like confidential data. Needs to be destroyed though, and done securely. That's important. It's the default classification level if a classification level hasn't been assigned. So maybe I haven't rolled out yet to everybody in the data owners aren't as involved as they should be, and there's whatever. There's some default classification. I've seen some organizations make that confidential. That's fine too. There's our labeling. So we like colors in our data labels because people don't read words, they react to, especially if I'm going through lots of documents. So red is confidential, blue is internal, and black is public, usually. So public data. Now, public data, when we talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, confidentiality is out the door, right? It doesn't even matter. But integrity is really important, right? I don't want something released to the public that's not true. Right? That can cause us a lot of damage. So just because data is classified as public doesn't mean I don't protect it. You need to make sure that you understand that it's got to be accurate still, and availability, right? If it's a high traffic website, posting public information, and a lot of our business depends on that being available. Availability is a big deal too. So confidentiality is not a concern, but integrity and availability are still, play a role in security. So public information open to the general public, release is not really restricted, other than that integrity piece. So when you make data publicly available, typically you go through some kind of a PR department or some type of a public something like that. So you're releasing the right information. No specific protection requirements for public data in the policy. It doesn't mean that you couldn't apply other, but you probably want to change the policy. Like I said, everything should be driven from policy, if possible. So it says there are no specific protection requirements. That doesn't mean that I can't apply security. Security. There just aren't any specific requirements in the policy. Does that make sense? So I can still apply protections. It's just there's no. Anyway. Should be marked regardless of the form it takes. Public data you can see is black, bold, italic, public data. This is like the most exciting day we ever had. Is it not? It is, right? All right, right up there. So ownership. Now I mentioned before there's a lot of different types of ownership. Like I'm working with an organization out in New York that's got like 6 layers of owners. It's like, they're like, we're having trouble reconciling user access. I'm like, well, duh. I don't know. I can't. Yeah, so we whiteboarded it. We whiteboarded this whole ownership thing. So they had business owner, application owner. They had they had business owner, business process owner, and application owner. I mean, it was just like so convoluted. So I was drawing it out on the whiteboard and it got like so messed up. And then I was like, whatever. So we changed it anyway, because you need to have something that people are going to follow. But it is possible that business owners is typically the person who is in charge of the department that relies on the assets to do what they do. Data owners, system owners, you see the difference between them. They're pretty self-explanatory. Owner responsibilities must be documented and they have to be trained. Don't expect them to know what it means to be a system owner. And then segregation of duties. Questions? All right. So compartments, just briefly here, we'll get more into it later. Require documented and approved, need to know. Additional control, they do allow for additional control because I can apply the specific control. It's like OUs in Active Directory. I can apply controls to the compartment potentially without affecting the entire system, or depending if it's security high, the whole system is basically a compartment. But it allows that additional control. Primarily in government systems. We don't use the term in real life of security compartments when we do our day-to-day work. Do you ever use? No. Need to know. So does the user, so that's the question you ask yourself. Does the subject or user have a need to know? If you really wanted to fully audit this, you would tie it back to job description. You have a documented job description, and in that job description, does it have the requirements that they need access to this? Most people don't keep up with job descriptions either in real life, but that's in a perfect world. That's where we'd be able to track it back to. The manager might determine, the need to know based on, tasks that have been assigned. More granular and least privileged, we talked again about need to know. I'm going to drive home some of this stuff and be like, this is so boring. If you say it one more time, I'm going to puke. There's a reason for it. Need to know applies to information itself, data and information. Least privilege applies to systems. Okay? All right, let's get into some memory and data remnants and that kind of stuff. This is a pretty good diagram. The closer you get to the CPU, so the rule of thumb is the closer I get to the CPU or on the CPU itself, the more expensive the memory is, meaning that it's more costly to the CPU and the operation of the computer. The further out I get, the cheaper it is. So in this case, cache memory is the fastest memory, level 1 cache. We might get a little deeper into this later on too. Level 1 cache is actually on the CPU. That's individual instructions like now. It's operating, it's pulling directly, the CPU is pulling directly from level 1 cache. Level 2 cache is connected, but not. So you can see level 2 is not actually on the CPU, a little less expensive and a little slower. So the further out I get from the CPU, also the slower the memory gets, usually, rule of thumb. And then static random access memory. The difference between static and non-static is refreshing, the refreshing of the memory itself. So other things I need to know for the test, random access memory is volatile. Volatile means that I pull power and it's gone. Now there's been attacks before where it's not actually gone or portions of it are gone, or if I apply dry ice to the computer system within a 15-minute time window, I can still read what was in memory, including encryption keys, right? Yes, that's true, but in practice, that stuff doesn't. Talk about risk, right? Likelihood of something bad happening and impact if it did. What's the likelihood of that? It's, but that, you could. There is that possibility. Modules installed in slots on the motherboard. So you've all seen the slots on a motherboard. They're the chips that you put on the slots, potentially. Dynamic random access memory, slower, cheaper, further out, less expensive. Small capacitors that store bits. That requires that we refresh continually. Every time we have capacitors, transistors and capacitors, I think, are the difference. Capacitors leak charge, so they must be continually refreshed. So they're constantly require that power. Static random access memory, fast and expensive. Latches called flip-flops, doesn't require flashing. I've got a nice. This came from an electrical engineer presentation that I found, so it's probably pretty accurate. So cell structure, transistors, capacitors. You don't need to know necessarily transistors versus capacitors. The important things, power that non-volatile RAM. Non-volatile RAM is like ROM, read-only memory, EEPROM, flash memory, that kind of stuff. Doesn't require that constant power. That's the non-volatile memory. But the difference between dynamic RAM and SRAM, access speed, important to know. Power dissipation, small and large. Any questions on that?
What does NM stand for under addressing?
Where's NM?
Addressing, multiplexing, and then NM.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know that?
I know multiplexing is, but I don't know what NM is. What?
Non-multiplexing?
Non-multiplexing? Yeah, maybe. You don't need to know.
Oh, yeah, that does make sense.
So addressing is, how data is stored in the memory and then how it's accessed. So for this slide, you won't even need to know that. You won't need to know that part. Extra credit.
You will want to know the differences in the memory that was addressed in the test.
Yeah, so if you know
Understand that.
this slide, I think you'll be fine for the test. We'll also talk more about this when we get into the architecture of computer systems. Yeah. So read-only memory, different types of read-only memory. You will see this on the exam too. I mean, I remember it from back in the day. So read-only memory doesn't require that constant power charge, but there's different types of read-only memory. So it can be stored firmware. So all the appliances that we see are firewalls and router switches. Those all have read-only memory. Our computer systems have read-only memory. We have a BIOS chip that has read-only memory. Small programs that don't change much, after they're configured. Different types of read-only memory, programmable read-only memory, written once by the manufacturer. in the purest sense. Now, most memory can be flashed, so it's EEPROM. It's erasable, so I can flash. I can flash my BIOS, right? So that's an EEPROM. Can be flashed usually with ultraviolet light. Actually, no, it's an EEPROM. Sorry, your BIOS is EEPROM. It's electrical. The difference between EEPROM and EEPROM, one is electrical and the other one's with ultraviolet light. I don't know, sounds cool, but sounds kind of psychedelic to me. But you get the difference, right? PROM, written once, for the test, it's written. And now there's always exceptions too, right? For hardware people, they'd be like, well, what about that? I mean, you can dig deep into this, but for the test, PROM is I write to it once and it doesn't get written to again. EEPROM, I can write to it multiple times. I can flash it, but it's with ultraviolet light. And then EEPROM is I can also flash it, but it's with electrical impulses, right? Electrical signals. PLD, programmable logic device. Field programmable devices are all, let's see, EEPROMs, flash memory are all PLDs. Flash memory can be, can be a security nightmare. Anything, I guess, can be a security nightmare. Specific type of EEPROM, large sectors. The reason why flash memory is sometimes a security nightmare is it's hard to erase data from it. Faster than the EEPROMs, but slower than magnetic drives. So it's like flash drives, right? These little USB flash drives, security nightmare, you think? I got free ones if you guys want them. You say FRSecure on them, and maybe a virus.
Totally safe.
No, plug it in, see, check your instant response process. No, they're all brand new. But this is how I take the slides and give them to Rob for him to post online. So flash memory is a big deal. And I've sat in front of, I remember I sat in front of the CEO of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and he said, we're not going to stop using flash drives. All right, legit. I mean, that's a legitimate business decision. It ranked a pretty high risk, but what's that?
That's his risk appetite.
It is his risk appetite, right? And so as a security person, whether I agree or disagree with it, that's not my call. And I appreciate that. At least he made a decision. But yeah, it can be a nightmare. It's so easy to do things with flash drives and people lose things. I mean, a great way, later. So memory solid state drives, those are popular now. Everybody's got SSDs in there. We'll talk about file wiping and shredding. The traditional way was to write random data or write multiple times to each block or each sector on the hard drive. Now, I can't do that in SSDs because there are no blocks or sectors in an SSD. So that's a challenge, right? And we saw a lot when SSDs became a lot more popular. You saw a lot more of these just being, I think, discarded without anybody doing anything to them. So combination of EEPROM and DRAM sanitization can definitely be a challenge. Here's some commands or things that you'll see potentially in the exam. One is garbage collection. So it's basically freeing up memory cells on the SSD for using at other times. So it's an off-peak operation. The trim command sort of gets rid of your information on the drive, but not really. It's an ATA command set tool. So ATA, it's lower level, typically run from a PROM of some sort, BIOS, or maybe the SSD itself has a controller. Can be wiped that way, or ATA secure erase is the best way. So that's a command that you can run.
So with the SSDs, are you seeing more disposed assets being looked at and exposed than you did with old spinning hard drives?
So the question is, with SSDs, do we see more compromise or more
after the assets get used.
breaches than we do with normal drives? I think no.
Okay.
No, but I think the propensity is there, right? Because the traditional ways I would wipe drives before, which people were starting to kind of get used to, don't work. in wiping. If I'm going to reuse the drive, physical destruction is the best, way to go. But SSDs were also so very expensive, so there was a big propensity for people to reuse those drives. Whereas your traditional hard drives are so cheap, people didn't mind destroying those with the asset. So, but I think it's kind of coming back in line, and I think people are onto it.
Yeah. I always thought SSDs were just a big flash drive, big USB.
Yeah,
flash drive.
basically.
There, pretty much.
Basically.
I mean, more designed for reliability. And
Yeah.
performance as well.
Yep. Yeah, basically a big flash drive, sort of. Yeah, you can't use DBAN on this either. DBAN is Derek's boot nuke.
Yeah.
No.
I never tried.
Yeah. Yeah. So, any questions on this? Any more questions on SSDs? Okay. Solid state drives. Everybody's got them now. That was the slowest component on laptops for the longest time. Was the hard drives. You could throw a ton of memory at the system and huge, awesome CPU, but the hard drive is still spinning at 5,600 RPM. Who cares? But now with SSDs, a lot of performance increase. All right, so SSDs, chances are all the laptops you're buying today have an SSD in them, at least a portion. They may also have another hard. What's that?
Surface has them.
Surface has, yep, Surface has the SSDs. Yep. So that's the way things are. Data destruction. So deleting data, formatting hard drives, we all know that that's not securely deleting data, right? If I just delete the file is still there. Essentially what I've deleted is the pointer in the file allocation table, or the file allocation table entry to the file. But the data is still there. So formatting hard drives is essentially replacing the file allocation table. So the file allocation table informs basically the operating system where to find data on the drive, which location. So leaving the file only removes the entry from the FAT. Speaking of 85 days, is that what we got? That's how much time I have to remove my FAT. Marks the block unallocated. The drive is still there, and you can still. Anybody use data recovery tools before? Yeah. Yeah, you can, so unless that data's been overwritten, it's still there. And the same holds, what's that? Even after that, in some cases, right. Right. So, the same as like with your flash drives, like your camera drives, the little card, deleting those pictures, the pictures are still there, probably, unless you've overwritten them probably numerous times. So reformatting older places, so that does apply in the flash memory, right? Those cards are also flash memory. So the data is still there, often retrievable. It's called data remnants. Data remnants, there are hundreds of recovery tools available, and there's a place where you can go grab some if you want to. I've deleted pictures off of cameras before, and then oh crap, I really wanted that, and I had to go back, and that's, we also do it in forensic stuff, and then that's a laboratory. So you need a clean room, like Crow on track. They have a clean room, right? So if you really want to get down and right, yeah. And they've got millions of dollars. I mean, they use electron microscopes to pull data off of drives. I mean, yeah. Chances are, so really, there's always been this debate about data destruction. There's the Gutmann pass, right? The 28 wipe pass, and which one should I do? The DoD, wipe, and all these others. Really, you just need one pass of all zeros or all ones across every sector of the drive, and you've stopped 90% of all attacks. And so you need something more like this if you're going to get data off a drive like that still, you know what I mean? So it's a risk reward kind of thing, right? Am I going to spend the time for that 35 pass wipe, or is one sufficient while I keep it physically secured in, you know, a storage area until it gets destroyed, right? So I don't know.
One thing I know with Microsoft is a built-in tool. A lot of people don't know
Right.
about Cipher.
Yep, Cipher
It'll
/.
do an overwrite of your free space. If you reformat and then run Cipher, it'll overwrite the drive.
You're right. Yeah, Slicer,
Really good.
Cipher like /X or something.
Yeah.
Colon the
And you can
drive
tell
or
it how many
something.
tasks to do and all
Yeah, that's true. So Cipher. Here's some other tools
that. There you go.
or other types of drives. So overwriting, also called shredding or wiping. So in a logical sense, overwriting is shredding or wiping. You've also got physical shredding, right? Of like, that's different. This is the logical type. Overwrites the data, removes the fat entry, secure overwrite, wiping every sector on the drive. So every single sector. The sector is the smallest part of the geometry on a hard drive that's addressable. So every sector, and we'll get to this too when we talk about forensics. When we conduct a forensic analysis. Last week I talked about working on a copy, a block by block binary copy is what you would operate on to do, you know, your analysis while you keep the original secure. So this is some examples of different types of overwriting. For the exam, you don't need to know all that. You need to know the stuff that's in the black text, but it's more kind of referencey things. These are just, there's DBAN. So DBAN's kind of the tried and true, the one that everybody sort of has used before, or like, I don't know, it's free, so, and it works. So DBAN is that one. Is that Cipher over there? Yep, that's Cipher. So there's the Cipher command on the bottom left. One pass is enough as long as each sector is overridden. That's in reality. You won't get asked on the exam, you know, should I do a 35 pass wipe or should I do a 1 pass wipe? That's not, you won't get asked that on the exam. In real life, 1 is really sufficient. The cost for the attacker to get data off of a one pass wipe exceeds the value of the data. Right? I would essentially need an electron microscope to get that data, which I don't know. I don't have one of those. They're expensive, I bet. But Kroll does. So if it depends on how bad of things you're doing on your hard drive. So tools include DBAN, there's some tools in Windows built-in Cipher command. Another way I can destroy data is degaussing. Degaussing. Do people call it degaussing or degaussing? I've always called it degaussing. Yeah, tomato. Right, we're going with degaussing. They destroy the integrity of the media itself. So if I'm gonna, and the importance here is if there's any type of a controller or any type of electronics or any type of circuitry in that media, that will also be destroyed. So if I run a hard drive through a degausser and then I want to reuse that hard drive, you're not going to be able to reuse that hard drive. Okay. Doesn't work on SSDs because SSDs are not magnetic. It doesn't work on flash drives because flash drives are not magnetic. This is about, you know, messing with the magnetic field. So there's a degausser. Those are cool because you can just put your drive. Some of them you just put them right on top. Some of them you've got to put them in, but it's really pretty neat. Big magnet, really. You've seen that on TVs before, right? It's all wah, 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 wah. That's kind of how degausser works.
Is that you can use that in real life?
Yeah,
Never.
I've had some clients who use degaussers. So because now people are, you know, more SSD and, you know, kind of, but it's a lot better than, or it saves me a lot of time from doing overwrites, right? Because an overwrite of every sector of a drive, even on a fast machine, is going to take a while. So if I can just put the drive on the thing and then put it in the bin, you know, for secure destruction, they're not that expensive. It's instantaneous. Yeah, there's no time. Well, I don't know. Not instantaneous, but, you know, really quick. Physical destruction. So, yeah, destroy stuff. Ideally, so now in real life, we like people to destroy drives on site. I would rather they back up the truck to my dock and destroy the drives here and usually provide some type of a recording or some type of certificate of destruction to give me that auditability piece, rather than ship the drives off to get destroyed or have you come pick them up and then take them somewhere to get destroyed. We've got a chain of custody problem, or I lose control of that drive for a while. So in reality, and it's the same cost basically.
A vendor that will do that will come to me with a truck and let me watch them destroy it, basically.
Yeah, it's pretty fun to watch too.
Kind of where my comfort
Something
level
else.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. There's a number of them and I think it's the one thing I've made it's not in the book, but a NAID certified vendor is a good one that you kind of assures quality, because everybody can say they destroy drives. Some people shoot them, but shredding is the way to do it with that full accountability. Shoot some drives. So that's the most secure method of destroying data. Physical destruction, incineration, pulverization, shredding, and acid. Never seen anybody use acid. They'd have to maybe be on acid to use acid. I don't know. Somebody does it somewhere because it's in the book. A hammer.
It's an untapped market.
An untapped market.
For using acid.
Is that fixing the broken industry? Maybe. I'll take that to our leadership team. It'll be a question of whether they let me do it or not. They won't. So NAID certified, so National Association of Information Destruction. On-site versus off-site, on-site is the way to go. Now in reality, really, if I take a hammer and I hit the spindle of a hard drive, that warps the platters and that makes them pretty much unreadable, right? I'd have to go to like a crawl on track. So in reality, I mean, that's probably sufficient. But destroy it better if you want. Other shredding, most people think of paper when they think of shredding. So having these locked bins. You guys all have these locked bins? You guys ever done an audit? Yeah, what have you found out?
You throw away stuff that should.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. I've done audits before too, and you find some really interesting information in the recycle bin. Because they usually, like in bigger companies, they'll have the printing area in the central part of the kind of the floor, and then you'll have the shredding bin, and then you'll have the recycle bin, right? And so they're like right next to each other, and man, you go grab into that recycle bin and just, oh, wow, So it's a good audit. If you've never done one, you should do an audit just to see if people are actually using these things. It's a good training piece too. And there are breaches, right? There's a couple in the last week or so of people not destroying paper records.
I have no idea where the shred was unlocked.
Yeah, unless
Somebody dug something away that you shouldn't have, or they needed to act, and then they didn't lock it afterwards. So it was, the door was open.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, hey, there you go.
Yeah, you sort of should lock them, I suppose. If it's got a lock on it, lock it.
Purpose of not a pattern. It's not locked.
Yeah, it can, for sure. Well, at least when somebody does come to pick it up, they'll take it and shred it. So at least there's that. But it's, that time in between, that's an issue. What else was I going to say about? Oh, I've been busted dumpster diving before. Did I ever tell you this story? Have you heard it?
No.
Have you heard it?
I think so.
Yeah? All right. So it was a social engineering attack. And one of the things in it's interesting because the police actually helped me. So when you do a social engineering attack, you get a letter of engagement. And that letter of engagement is essentially my get out of jail free card. So if somebody with authority, like a police officer, stops me, I can whip out that letter of engagement, and it doesn't stop me from getting arrested, but it stops me from getting charged, right? Getting arrested is not a big deal. It's getting booked and all the other stuff. So, so in this case, it was a pharmaceutical company in Bloomington, and I was in part of trying to figure out how we were going to create our pretext. I needed to find some information about this organization. So we decided to go dumpster diving. It was like a Saturday. When in this particular, oftentimes what we'll do too, and we won't tell the client, is we'll have that real authentic engagement letter, and we'll have a fake one, right? The fake one, instead of calling the client, you're calling one of us, right? So anyway, so I'm in the dumpster, and it's Saturday, and police officer drives by, doing his rounds through the parking lot and finds me in the dumpster, right? Gets kind of mad and whatever, and so gets me out. And then you have this decision: am I going to give him the real? You always have this if you're doing it this way. You have: am I going to give him the real certificate, letter of engagement, or the fake one? If I choose wrong, then I'm probably going to get booked, right? Because now I've falsely impersonated, and that's a crime, right? So that's a big deal. So, but I figured that we were talking okay, and so I gave him the fake one. He called the one of our analysts at the time, and I had no idea what the conversation was going on. We didn't really play that out, but he got off the phone and said, "Okay, thank you very much." Had a conversation and said, "Okay, thank you very much," and then said, "Okay, you can continue," and then stood there and helped me to take boxes out. So then I asked the analyst, "What did you say?" And what he had said was, "Yeah, this is authorized. This is a really important project for us. It has highest visibility. If you don't mind, if it's not busy tonight, you don't mind helping him, that'd be great." And so here I am, So I'm taking stuff out of the dumpster, and the cop is helping me. It's pretty cool. But what we were looking for was that sensitive information that made it into the trash or made it into the, I guess, what's that called? Recycling. I have a friend of mine too. He works in HVAC. He's weird. Imagine that, right? A friend of mine who's weird. He's an HVAC guy, and what he works, he'll go like Rapala. Is there a Rapala place around here somewhere? Like a place that makes like a Rapala manufacturing facility? Because he always comes back with lures and wants to know if the ones that they throw out, the defects, he goes and grabs them out of the dumpster. So you'd be amazed, I guess. But most people think of paper strip cut, cross cut. So the difference between strip cut are really easy to lay out on a piece of, on a table and put it all back together again, right? They're just cut in strips. There's no crossing. Cross cut is harder. You can still put it together. You've seen people do that, but it's a lot more difficult. So when I'm trying to protect against attackers, think of like the work factor. How much work is it going to take for you to compromise? And that's what I'm going to exceed, right? So I'm not trying to make things impossible. I'm just trying to make it hard enough to where it's not going to be valuable enough for you to even do it, right? So crosscut can be defeated, easy to audit. So it's the fun stuff. Many breaches, even recently, have been attributed, especially in healthcare. You guys store like every medical record, like ever. Do you do that? Like physical medical records are like most hospitals. You've been to hospitals? You've done any assessments of hospitals? Yeah. You go down into like this, usually it's in a basement. They always seem to put it in a basement. And there's usually no camera surveillance down there. There's usually no access control down there.
No climate control.
Yeah, right next to the boiler room.
Yeah.
And it's like rows and rows and rows of medical records. It's like, holy crap. So that would be a big news item if somebody, went there. All right. Any questions on that? Data destruction. We're good on that. All right. Certification and accreditation. So this is something you'll definitely need to know for the exam too, because it's one of those things that they just seem to drive on every time. So the difference between certification is actually meeting the standard or the requirements. Accreditation is the acceptance by an authority that you met the requirements. So they're two different things. Certification and accreditation are two entirely different things. Certification, again, making sure that I met the requirements. Accreditation is acceptance that I met the requirements by somebody of authority, usually the owner, the system owner. But it could be the certification body. So like in ISO, there's certification bodies who are people of authority that can look at a certification and sign off on it. And High Trust is the High Trust. Is it just High Trust or they come High Trust Alliance? Which actually is one guy. No, I'm just kidding. It's the guy behind the curtain. So certification is validation that, again, that we've met the requirements, and acceptance is the accreditation. Memorize that. Make sure you understand the difference between certification and accreditation. Some standards and frameworks. So here we are again with PCI DSS. That's the data security standard maintained by the SSC, the council. Comprehensive security standard, pretty prescriptive, right? It's pretty rigid. to become PCI compliant. Yeah. Originally sanctioned and developed by the major card brands, and now they still have involvement with the Security Council, but the Security Council is kind of its own thing now. Applies to payment cards now, not just credit cards, but credit and debit cards and their security. Some of the acronyms you'll see when dealing with PCI DSS is QSA, that's a Qualified Security Assessor. There's two types. There's a QSA as an organization, then there's a QSA as a practitioner. ASVs, authorized scanning vendors in cardholder data environment, are what those stand for. Now, the important thing about cardholder data environment is PCI requirements only apply to the cardholder data environment. So in practice, it's really important for me to appropriately scope and segment that cardholder data environment, because being that the PCI DSS is prescriptive and sort of rigid, would it make better sense for me to apply to this part of my organization or the entire organization? The answer is a small piece. So make that, and ideally get rid of all cardholder data environment entirely, right? Offload all credit card processing and handling. But PCI DSS only applies to the cardholder data environment. Now the cardholder data environment, if I haven't segmented, it's everything. So really important, scope is super important. So core principles of PCI DSS, number one, build and maintain. And this hasn't changed really from version to version, even though we're on version 3.2 now. Now there's 3.2, but then there's additional guidance that comes out occasionally from the Security Council to provide clarification on things. So build and maintain a secure network and systems, protect cardholder data, maintain a vulnerability management program, strong access control, regularly monitor and test, and maintain an information security policy. So you can see where, like, monitor and test, for instance. In the cardholder data environment, I'd have to have an SIEM solution. That's basically what it's come down to now. An SIEM solution, do you guys know what that is? Security info. What's that? Yep, sort of, yep. So security information and event management. Sometimes people call it security incident and event management. It's whatever. It's security information and event management. Yes, SIEM. So, and what it is it is a log aggregator. It's also a log correlation engine. So I get all these logs from different systems, a centralized logging repository. Then there needs to be some type of a correlation that takes place. There needs to be some correlation rules, because what I want to present to the user, and that's the next part of an SIEM solution, is a dashboard, right? A snapshot of what's actually happening on the network based on all the information we've collected. Now, in a cardholder data environment, we basically have to have that, whereas the rest of my environment, I mean, it makes sense to have that. Maybe it does, but you can see how, that's a lot more stringent, just as one example. Vulnerability management is big too. Yeah.
Did Target, Home Depot, and all of those have an SCIM solution at the time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know about Home Depot. I wasn't involved in that breach, but Target did. Mm-hmm. Target was PCI compliant. They had a QSA who signed off and said, you are PCI compliant. That QSA, not to mention names, was TrustWave. And, I think they did a really good job. I mean, honestly, I think it was but PCI, when you really get into all of it, it's really a game. I mean, it's a liability push kind of game. And so the QSA is never liable, really, for a breach. It's the merchant, who's pretty much liable. Yeah, right? So Target, Home Depot, Heartland Systems, Dairy Queen, I don't know. There's tons and tons and tons of them now. They're not even news anymore. So that link, I think, sort of goes to here. This is the document library. So if you want to read the standard itself, you want to see SAQ documents. SAQ stands for Self-Assessment Questionnaire. The basics are testable, right? Some of the stuff that where I'm going into more detail isn't really testable, but self-assessment questionnaire, there's guidance for scoping and segmentation right on that document library homepage. So even the Security Council knows how important that is. This is from the Security Council's website. Octave. This is, it's really pretty cool, but I haven't really run into anybody who's using it. Octave is a control framework, and it also allows you to do a risk assessment, a pretty good one. developed by Carnegie Mellon, just didn't gain traction. Maybe, I don't know why. Maybe just too, I don't know. Really, I'd be speculating. The things to know about Octave is that it was, but from Carnegie Mellon, it is a control framework and risk assessment kind of methodology, all sort of bundled into one. A three-phase process for managing risk: staff knowledge, assets, and threats. So number one, there's assets again. I need to have an asset inventory. I need to know what it is I'm actually trying to protect, and what are the applicable threats. So threats and vulnerabilities lead to likelihoods and impacts, which is where I get my risk piece. So phase two is identifying those vulnerabilities and what controls I have in place and how effective they are. And then phase three is kind of bundling that all together into the risk analysis. And then having that mitigation of that roadmap afterwards. So Octave is it's got the R on it. What is that? Registered trademark. And then the SM, I couldn't find the superscript in whatever application I'm using, PowerPoint, but that's a service mark. That's also trademarked, service marked. ISO, we could spend a long time on ISO. ISO's got a long history. It came from the British standard 7799, then it became 17799. That then became ISO 27002, basically, :2005. So that standard in its entirety was just brought into, and that's because ISO was creating a bunch of other standards that were all in the 2700 series. So we just married that one in. So maintained by the International Standards Organization. You always see ISO, IEEE, or IEC. I don't know what IEC stands for, but you don't need to know it. There are multiple standards. So 30 ISO, IEC, 27. So it's a series of standards. So we say ISO 27. I want to become ISO certified. You need to kind of. Usually they're saying ISO 27001, which then leads to ISO 27002. 27001 is the security techniques. You also see that in 27001, you define the scope of your ISO practice or certification. You guys go on ISO? You guys doing an ISO certification?
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys, yeah, and I think, okay, yeah, so you guys are going through the process right now. These are the ISO standards that you need to know. These are testable. So ISO 27001, information technology security techniques. ISO 2700, that's the code of practice. That's more prescriptive and it's actually not all that prescriptive, but it actually tells you how to take the techniques and put them into practice. It's a good standard. If I was going to buy one, these are all, you have to buy these, and we have bought them. So I said, I bought them. If you have a security team, you buy them all. But 27002 is the one if you were going to use it to manage, kind of build your security program or measure your security program against it. 2702. 27005 is risk management. And then you see, to make things even more complicated, because that's what we do in security, 27799, which whenever I see that, I think of 17799, which is 27002:2005, which came from BS 7799. It's like, what? But to make it complicated, 27799 is risk management or security management in healthcare. So those are the good ones to memorize. It's a good standard. And so in lieu of, so one of the things you had asked about, Noah, was NIST CSP 800-53. Typically, if somebody's building a security program, we'll steer them more toward, we used to anyway, steer them more towards ISO as an alternative to NIST because of the prescriptive nature of NIST. So 17799 and 270, yeah, mentioned in the book as the latest, but it's not. Is that true in this book? I don't know. Did anybody read this chapter? Is 2005 the latest? It's actually 2013 is the latest. I think I'd written this last year, so I'm not sure if it still is. Copyrighted and licensed, so you have to pay for it. Pay for it in Swiss. What do they do? Francs? EU stuff, something. Anyway, they do the translation, you buy it. There's a cover page of that standard. It's a good read. If you want to, yeah. I mean, if I were to read any one of these standards, like actually read it word for word, I would read that one. It's an easier read too. COBIT. So COBIT is put on by ISACA, or developed by ISACA and governed by ISACA. ISACA is the Information Systems Audit and Control Association. That's where your CISM, our CISM comes from. Anybody who's CISA, that's where all that stuff comes from. Things to remember about COBIT: 34 information technology processes across 4 domains. Now, one of the reasons why I don't like COBIT, and I think a lot of security practitioners maybe don't, is 34 information technology. It's very IT. It's too IT specific for me. They've changed that a little over time, but it kind of got a bad name out of the gate, so it still keeps it. COBIT version 5, I think, is the latest version that we're on. 4 domains are plan and organize, acquire and implement, deliver and support, and monitor and evaluate. So you can see how that fits nicely into a life cycle. And that's COBIT. Control objectives for information and related technology, version 5. ITIL. So ITIL isn't a security standard per se, but it's got security things in it. It's really around, IT service management. So the IT, information technology, infrastructure library, IT service management, there's this site. I don't know if you've ever looked, anybody here ITIL certified? You are. Did you, when you first started looking into, like, when you Google ITIL, you don't come to the site. It's like you have to look hard to try to find this.
Yeah, you have to want to get there.
Has anybody ever Googled ITIL and try to find like who's the actual governing body for this place?
Or even just to get a general
Yeah.
Every site has a different.
So it's funny that they decide. I think they recognize that crap, because they name their site itil-officialsite.com.
Real Donald Trump.
Yeah, yeah. Like this is really the one, not all those other ones that you've got. They clicked on first.
It's difficult to figure out where to go to take the test to register for too.
Is it?
It's through a third party.
Okay, so it's hard to test for it too.
It was difficult to.
Hard to find where to test for it.
Yeah.
And you, at your organization, like Catherine, she's ITIL. I think, yeah, I think a lot of them, they're ITIL certified. But here are the 5 management practices, core guidance, and you'll see security. If you do read, I've never read ITIL, so I don't know, firsthand. But the rumor is that security is kind of built into, all of these management practices. So service strategy, service design, service transition, service operation, continual service improvement. Again, you see the life cycle there. All right, NIST CSF. Anybody using NIST CSF? Know what it is? Seen it? Read it? That good stuff. Anybody else struggle with actually applying this in their own environment? Like doing a risk assessment against NIST CSF. It's kind of hard, right? Because if you follow the way they lead you in NIST, because each one of the subcategories is supported by the control, and then you have a number of referenced standards. So it can get kind of hard to actually apply it. But NIST was authorized by the president. So this is a presidential directive. Really the only framework and standard that we have that was directly related to a presidential directive, right? I mean, it was like presidential directive, here's NIST CSF. All the things in NIST are kind of related to some kind of agency, government agency, but this one is. So when that became kind of the thing, so when Obama signed 13686 and they assembled this team to develop the cybersecurity framework, they assembled a really good, solid team of, they sought a lot of public input. They developed the cybersecurity framework, core implementation tiers, and framework profile. That's kind of where things get, I think, a little bit funny, because that's all those are all words that we've never used before in information security. So core is comprised of 5 functions. So that's kind of the cool thing about NIST CSF. So if I want to know what controls apply to identifying my risks versus what controls apply to protecting, because I know what I can't protect, I need to detect and respond and recover. So that fits really nicely with how we manage a security program. So the 5 functions are awesome. The categories are really pretty easy to understand. The subcategories are also pretty easy to understand. So it starts with the functions, the categories, subcategories, and then you've got supporting standards. And it's nice that they put it in a spreadsheet too. right? So we can use the spreadsheet to manipulate it and everything. We're actually building an assessment today based on this standard. Well, FISA is built on this standard as well, but not directly as close and not as related as the small business version of our assessment that we're developing today. It's pretty cool. Major frameworks and standards are represented. It's voluntary, so it's not, nobody has to implement unless a big company tells you you have to. Then if you want their business, then you have to do it. Not testable, but it's important. If you don't know about the framework, it's a good read. Not a good read. It's a good peruse it. Look at it. Is peruse the same as read? Is that the same word? Yeah, peruse it. But not for the, you don't need to do it for the exam. So NIST CSP 800-53, here we're just going to mention it because we're going to dig in deeper to NIST CSP 800-53. SP stands for Special Publication. These are all freely available. You can go and download. You know, if you Google that, you'll find it. You can read it. It's a good standard. It's just a little too prescriptive and kind of rigid. If you're working in the government or work, you know, either in or with the government, this is a mandatory standard because it's directly related to FISMA compliance. FISMA compliance is Federal Information Security Management Act. Yeah, so it goes hand in hand with FIPS. So FIPS is a Federal Information Processing Standard. So there's 199, 200, and NIST CSP 800-60. Essentially, FIPS 199, 200, and 800-60 are meant to kind of determine sort of what's in scope and how critical these systems are to the government before we apply the NIST CSP 800-53, the specific controls. Loose. Now, somebody who's in the government would probably laugh at that and say, no, that's not how we use it, but that's how we use it. Not entirely testable either. So FIPS 199 is a classification standard, classifying the information assets so then I can apply the controls. All right, we'll deal with this more later. We'll dig into it more later. And you'll be super happy about it. All right? All right. So scoping and tailoring. Now, scoping which portions. So you don't apply a standard. You don't take a standard and come hell or high water, this is the control we're going to put in place in the environment, right? That's a control-based security program and it doesn't work. Nor do compliance-based security programs, so just because there's too much interpretation. So you build risk-based security programs, and I use the standard as reference, right? So for scoping, it's which portions of the standards apply, which don't, right? So you look at, you know, ISO. ISO's got, you know, portions of the standard that are, or controls that are specific to e-commerce. Well, I don't do e-commerce, so I'm not going to apply that. You know, control. That's an obvious one. But just because the control says, and you'll run into this if you run into it with like an internal audit department that's kind of, that doesn't understand this. But just because the control says that I need to do this doesn't mean I'll necessarily do it. But what I should do is where I'm not going to implement those controls, assess the risk to determine whether I should put that control in it or not. Does that make sense? So scoping is that part. Tailoring, customizing the standard to fit the organization. So scoping and tailoring go hand in hand in that way. So scoping, determining what parts of the standard we're going to apply, and then customizing the standard to make it my own version of ISO is the tailoring piece. Cool? And that's how you apply standards. Standards are like pictures on the box, right? I use them to reference and maybe to measure against, but I don't use them verbatim. Encryption and physical security. So rule of thumb, if I can't assure the physical security of an asset, encrypt it. That's just the rule of thumb. So that's why I encrypt data that goes outside of my organization, because the media that data is transferred on, I don't have physical security of that. Anybody can tap into it. The routers and switches along the way, I don't have physical security of those things. That's why we haven't traditionally put an emphasis on encrypting data in transit within the internal network, because I have physical security of those assets, right? That's traditionally why we wouldn't do that. Same with data at rest, right? I encrypt data on backup tapes. I encrypt data on flash drives because I can't assure the physical security of the media, right? But a server in my data room that has 6 layers of defense and has camera surveillance everywhere and armed guards and everything else, it probably doesn't, and I've got really good data destruction practices that are fully auditable. That may be a good justification to not encrypt data at rest, right? Those are mitigating controls. So rule of thumb, if I can't be assured of the physical security of the asset, encrypt the data. So data in transit and data at rest, that's how you play that. We like encryption. I'm a big encryption guy, so I say encrypt everybody. I'd encrypt Brad if I could. I don't know how to do it. I like to keep it protected. Yeah, we'll have to convert you to digital. We'll have to get a modem for Brad. So find a Brad modem, right? Oh no, I'm working on it, man. That's what I do in my office. But encryption, you know, when in doubt, encrypt it. It, you know, gets you so much more than usually it costs you. People people give all kinds of reasons not to encrypt, like, well, it's a big performance hit. It's not significant. It's not usually not significant enough that you notice, and if it is, then offload it to a dedicated controller.
Especially now with SSDs on laptops, the disk speed was just slow.
Right.
What slowed it down. SSDs.
Right. Yeah. There's really no reason. It's pretty inexpensive. And now that everybody is sort of encrypting, now they've risen that bar for that negligence piece, right? The do, care, do. So if you're not encrypting now, especially on removable media or mobile media, it's a big deal. All right, so this is what we're going to talk about next. We're not going to do it today, so you guys don't have to freak out. You got, yeah, bathroom down the hall to the left. You should escort him. No, I'm just kidding. He went down the wrong hall. See? Now he's snooping in a. Hey, he just took something. Yes, he's actually going to go watch now. Right. So this is what we're going to talk about next week. So that we're done with the content for today. Not too painful. I know it wasn't the most exciting piece because I could, as I'm looking out at you guys are like, what? You know, that's what some of the CISSP is, right? It is a lot of memorization. It's kind of dry. I try to make it looser, but it is what it is. What's that?
I said, and some of it you're doing every day.
Some of it you're doing it every day, right? And it's like, yeah, it's like the back of your hand, right? Yep, it's true. But I still love it. I mean, I can't think of doing anything else. So theoretical and conceptual stuff, this we're going to talk about next on Thursday. We will have more content, right? So we had less content, really very little content last Tuesday. A little more Thursday, a little more today. Thursday is going to be a little more, and then it's going to get heavy quick, right? You'll be dreaming about security stuff. So security models, evaluation methods, certification, accreditation, secure system design concepts, secure hardware architecture, secure operating system and software architecture. This is just sounds, you know, super exciting for us. Virtualization and distributed computing, system vulnerabilities, threats, and countermeasures. I get a kick and love all this stuff, so hopefully you guys will too. Encryption. Talk about some encryption stuff. This is my favorite domain to talk about. And the reason why I like this domain so much is because you start out with the history behind cryptography. And I'm a big history guy, so it's like I get giddy, you know, about how, you know, encryption has won us wars and people don't really realize it. You know, so some geek in some closet somewhere, you know, it's really, really cool stuff. So encryption, physical security. Physical security is traditionally very easy to relate to because it's physical, right? I can see it or I can touch it. It's a lot more difficult to risk rate, right? It's one of the, I think, the more challenging parts of security to actually apply information security metrics to, you know. So anyway, quiz forthcoming. I'll try to get no, probably won't. Read the quiz. We'll go through the quiz for this chapter in the next class, right? That's where we'll start off, kind of the same format that we did today. If you have questions anywhere, send me. I only had one last week. Pretty disappointed in all of you. I mean, I was just disappointed to only get one, sorry. No, but send me questions. I like questions. It also gives us things to discuss. So if you're struggling with the concept or a part just doesn't seem to be fitting, let me know so that we can talk about it here, because it probably isn't fitting for somebody else, or maybe I didn't cover it right. That, you know, that happens too. So send me questions. Quiz we'll talk about. So if you do get to that point in the book, go ahead and do the quiz. We're going to cover it in this class, kind of the same format. start reading chapter 4, domain 3, up to, we'll cover everything up to encryption. So we're going to leave off before we get into encryption, unless we're making a lot of progress and we want to talk about encryption. Complete quiz, page 49. Come with questions. That's it. Anything I can answer now for anybody?
Mine, sorry, but you have the, when you're doing the dumpster diving,
Uh-huh.
the fake letter engagement and the real letter engagement, I didn't understand the purpose.
Are you a cop?
No.
He has to tell you.
How would you know?
Yeah, he has to tell me if he is, right? Right. No, okay. So what was the question?